Hello, this is Mr. Ferreira, and I'm going to be talking you through the second part of the specification on relationships, and it's called Factors Affecting Attraction. Now, there are actually three factors that we need to look at, and the first factor is self-disclosure, which this video will talk about. There's also physical attractiveness and filter theory as part of this section. So let's have a look at the content that we need to have a look at. So first of all, I think all of us can pretty much understand the term self-disclosure, but Girard does kind of give us some kind of indication as to this. It says it's the extent to which a person reveals personal information about themselves to another person. Okay, so this is what we mean by self-disclosure. So up in the top right there, we see first dates. Now, this is a UK television program where people are set up on first dates, and they kind of film the conversation and kind of how things get on. So we're talking about this idea that maybe self-disclosure could really help a person potentially put forward a positive message and help them both be attracted to the person that they're speaking to and to be attractive. So what Girard goes on to say is that in early stages of a relationship, so something like a first date, or kind of when the relationship is kind of starting out, says self-disclosure can play a vital role. So what this part of the course is basically saying is that in order to be attracted to somebody else, we potentially need to have this self-disclosure. But of course, if you think about self-disclosure, how much you tell the person about yourself, we all kind of probably know that we need to be careful. So think about why we should be careful. So this course isn't saying that there's a kind of a linear relationship between the more we disclose, the more we are going to be attractive. It's kind of asking us to look at the nuance of self-disclosure. And so it's a bit obvious that we might disclose too much or disclose something that the other person cannot handle or doesn't want to kind of deal with. Now, if you're looking at this kind of once we finish the course, there's also a part of the course where we look at investment. So, of course, disclosure later on into the relationship may well actually be something which the person can deal with, and so therefore has either invested more into the relationship. So let's kind of unpack some of these ideas kind of a little bit further. Now, this is a key study. In terms of a key study, what I am going to say is that this could be used as research support. We actually see that reciprocity is an important aspect of self-disclosure. So Sprecher is trying to do some work on this and trying to see whether people do respond positively to reciprocal self-disclosure. So reciprocal, remember back to the attachment topic where we looked at caregiver-infant interactions, and we saw reciprocity was an important part of the attachment relationship. So remember, it's kind of I do something and you respond to it. Okay, so that's what reciprocal self-disclosure is going to be. So if I ask you a question, you answer it. Potentially you then ask me a question, I answer it, and it's this back and forth. And what Sprecher is basically going to show us is that it's more influential and more kind of profitable than one-sided self-disclosure. Okay? In terms of this particular study, we see that there were 156 participants. Now, it's not that important for us to kind of be hung up on the fact that he called the pairs two-person dyads, but people were divided into pairs. It's also not a problem that there are female and female pairs, because obviously in terms of who volunteered for this particular study, they're able to find more females. But we can still ask at the end of a reciprocal self-disclosure conversation whether you liked the conversation, whether you enjoyed it, whether you felt close to the person and things like that. So it's not really going to be much of a problem. In fact, they did this particular conversation that they're going to have over Skype, which is a bit like FaceTime. And in order to try and remove some of those other characteristics that might influence whether you enjoy a conversation. So, for example, physical attractiveness, desirability, and things like that. So it's really just going to be focusing on the question. So on the questions and responding to them. So there's also a non-reciprocal condition. So what we're going to see, that spreadsheet kind of looks at kind of the depth or how much disclosure the partner is going to give. And between the two conditions, they both give the same amount and receive the same amount of disclosure. However, with the reciprocal one, it was kind of turn taking, one person, then the next person, and so forth and so on. In contrast, the non-reciprocal group has the questions asked by one person, and the other person answers all of them, and then they change turns, and then the other person gets a chance to do it. And you could call this extended reciprocity. Now, of course, in terms of research projects, they are trying to make some kind of judgment, and so they look at several things. Look at these 4 things: whether the person likes the other person, feels close to the other person, feels similar to the other person, and enjoys the other person. So we're trying to see, in terms of this, kind of what goes on when we have this reciprocal turn taking. Now, of course, the findings that were kind of interesting and relevant to this particular course is that in the reciprocal condition, it said that all the dyads, so all the pairs, reported more liking, more closeness, more similarity, and more enjoyment. So this is kind of showing us that in terms of if attraction, think back to that first date scenario, that actually reciprocal turn-taking disclosure is going to be a lot more profitable. Now, of course, what they do test is to make sure that it's not about how much is disclosed, because after both people in the extended disclosure group are finished, they ask the same questions again, and we see that once again the reciprocal turn-taking group does generally have a much kind of more enjoyable time. This can be represented in this graph, and we actually see quite simply that in every single condition we have the dark green line kind of being top. You also probably could notice that closeness is potentially the lowest scoring element of this particular experiment, but that's possibly because in terms of disclosure, we might think about that closeness might come after time and after shared experiences, and this of course is just one experience. But I suppose the most remarkable one for me would be this enjoyment. It's very, very clear that it's more enjoyable to have the reciprocal turn-taking rather than non-reciprocal. Okay, so that's just pretty much explaining what we see in the graph. We see reciprocity is more likely to lead to positive interpersonal outcomes. So if I'm going to talk about factors affecting attraction, we quite clearly see that reciprocity is important. In fact, this is further supported by Rees and Shaver, who also looked at this and kind of said that reciprocal self-disclosure is required, and especially because it gives you some kind of indication in terms of investment and trust. Okay, we see here that there might be a breakdown in trust if one is more invested than the other. So in other words, if I feel that I'm always the one disclosing and you're not disclosing, so in other words, it's not reciprocal, it may be a problem. To take this kind of the next step further, we also have the social penetration theory, and this is probably what we were thinking about in terms of how much do we disclose at first, and they pretty much said that it's both breadth and depth that are important in self-disclosure. So clearly in the beginning of a relationship, or the early stages of a relationship developing, we may explore only superficial factors, kind of what do you do for work, or where did you go on holiday, or those types of things. However, as time progresses, we find that people share more detail. Okay, and as such, that's kind of where the disclosure comes into place. And of course, it's that depth that potentially he goes on to call social penetration, and is saying that if the sharing happens too soon, there could be an incompatibility issue. So for example, kind of going back to this idea that maybe I don't want to invest into a relationship if potentially those traumas are things that I can't deal with. However, as time progresses and we both have disclosed and we penetrate even further, we might find that actually I'm going to want to invest and be part of the relationship. So most of these particular knowledge points, I think, are fairly straightforward. They're kind of indicating quite clearly that in order to kind of facilitate attraction, disclosure becomes quite important. The evaluation points can be either the key study, we can use the Sprecher study, or we can turn to other particular studies like AARON. Now, they're all kind of pretty much saying the same thing. They're saying that there's research support. Now, there's a very good video which I've put onto your Google Classroom for you to have a look at that is kind of supporting or showing us this particular AARON study. So he had a series of questions which he asked people to ask each other in a reciprocal nature. And like they could start with superficial questions like, who would be your perfect dinner party guest? Think about what you had answered to that one. Then as the questions kind of progress, we find that they get a little bit more challenging or emotionally challenging. So for example, of all the people in your family, whose death would you find the most disturbing? And of course, what AARON shows us is people did grow closer and more intimate as the questions progressed. So in other words, this is kind of just doing exactly what that either social penetration is showing us, or this idea that a factor is self-disclosure. Now, of course, there's one further element that AARON actually included in his particular study, and that he kind of forced intimacy. So go back to the original Sprecher study, we probably would have recognized that actually that was just kind of back and forth, and people said that they didn't kind of feel close to the other person. So AARON is potentially forcing that closeness by this intimate 4-minute stare. And if you are interested in this, you can watch that video where we see a couple that potentially took part in this particular study go on to kind of fall in love, and they repeat this particular kind of 36 questions kind of a week later, and they're kind of still together for that. Now, of course, this is all kind of appearing to be kind of too good and too brilliant. We need to kind of consider that maybe in terms of self-disclosure, we've got to be careful that we don't kind of overemphasize it. There could be other factors that could also lead to attraction. So for example, if I'm disclosing things that the other person actually also is either disclosing themselves or has a familiar experience with, that's obviously going to be a lot more helpful than if the things that I'm disclosing are completely kind of a turn off for the other person. Also could be in terms of kind of what stage in life I am, whether I'm looking for a relationship, whether I'm kind of not looking for commitment, and things like that. But what is quite clear, obviously, in terms of both these evaluation points and knowledge points, is that disclosure seems to be an important part. Now, Collins and Miller also kind of talk about this and talk about it in terms of kind of maybe something like validating. That of course we like people who engage in intimate disclosures. We like them because they kind of feel that element of trust, because they seem to be telling us something. In fact, Collins and Miller say that this is especially true if it's something which they don't share with a lot of people. Now, of course, this is something that I think many of you are familiar with, because in terms of friendships, kind of think about the people that you are friends with. These are the people that you have shared kind of certain things with and disclose certain things with. Also, at that particular stage, thinking about friends, of course, it kind of the question would be, well, why don't we have relationships with our best friends? And that's because obviously we're going to have other factors that kind of lead towards attraction. So between kind of your Sprecher study and your AARON, we have quite a lot of kind of studies just simply saying that self-disclosure is important. I've got another strength here saying that, of course, just looking at the link between self-disclosure and whether kind of it's an enjoyable experience. And so Sprecher and Hendricks did some further research and basically just watched couples on dates and basically said there was a close correlation between satisfaction and the amount of people disclosed. So satisfaction is often a word used in relationships where we are looking at kind of whether it's an enjoyable experience or not. Okay, so you can You can see pretty much that almost all the research kind of points in kind of the right direction. But the reason I kind of use this one is to kind of highlight that it's often the data that we collect is going to be correlational. And of course we can't find a causal relationship because it's not. It's we can't say that this amount of disclosure will lead to this amount of falling in love or attraction, and because it's just that it's just showing us that disclosure is an important aspect of attraction, but not that it causes attraction, because we got to think of, as I said, other factors. Okay, and of course, for example, attraction might be an issue. That might explain why you don't necessarily go out with your best friend if you're not attracted to them. See how that kind of works, or why potentially that kind of other aspects that we might have might lead to other forms of intimacy. And so therefore just remember that this whole topic is asking us to look at factors affecting attraction, and self-disclosure was simply one of them. In my next video I'll kind of look at the physical attractiveness aspect of this. I hope that you've enjoyed this video and that you're finding the course interesting, and I will hopefully see you soon. Take care. Bye.